Reading this evening is taken from Deuteronomy, the 31st chapter. I'll be reading verses 7 and 8. I'll be reading from the New King James. Then Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, "Be strong and of good courage, for you must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall cause them to inherit it. And the Lord, He is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear nor be dismayed."
Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see each and every one of you, and we are thankful for another opportunity to open up God's Word and take some lessons from it and try to apply it to our lives. We're thankful for the song leading from Brother Mark. We're thankful for the scripture reading. We're thankful for the prayer, all those that are actively engaged in those things. We're thankful for that. We're going to have one more lesson from Deuteronomy. I've been trying to do a book of a month, and I kind of pushed this one into this month just because I really had it ready. And it's one that I had certainly thought about, and think it was too good to just not let it be preached and go out there. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, we've already looked at a few lessons from Deuteronomy. So we've got Moses kind of giving a farewell speech, if you will, a repeating of the law to the children of Israel. And he is trying to accomplish a lot of things in a short amount of time as he's closing in on the end of his life, and I think Moses knows this. There's a lot of things that have to happen. I think Moses knows some things about the children of Israel, and he's trying to do the best he can to put them on the best trajectory that he can. He gave them many warnings. One of those warnings we looked at is you're about to go into the promised land. It's going to be very good. You're going to live in homes that you didn't necessarily build, vineyards that you didn't plant. You're going to be rich and prosperous. Don't forget God when times are good. That was one warning he had. Another warning he had was when you get into the promised land, you're going to see these people that are doing all kinds of things that you should not be engaged in. Don't get big eyes and start looking at how they worship and how they conduct themselves and think, oh, God's okay if we conduct ourselves the way that they're doing it. And in fact, we see that some of the groups inside the promised land were actually sacrificing their kids, sacrificing their sons and daughters. And he warns them, he says, don't go in there and see what they do and think that you can do those things. Unfortunately, as the years roll on, that's exactly what the children of Israel do. They get engaged in such activities where they're sacrificing their own sons and daughters. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, I think Moses is trying to encourage. He's trying to encourage, in particular, not only the children of Israel, but Joshua. Moses is about to die. He's not going to go into the promised land because of his mistake at Kadesh that occurs. And he's, I believe, trying to encourage Joshua, the next leader. Joshua is going to pick up the reins, and he is going to lead the children of Israel. And what Moses says to the children of Israel and to Joshua, I think, can be applicable to us today and for us to certainly consider and think about. As you look in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 6 through 8, let's just read it one more time. Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear nor be afraid of them, for the Lord your God, He is the one who goes with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Then Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of Israel, of all of Israel, be strong and of good courage, for you must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall cause them to inherit it. And the Lord, He is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear nor be dismayed. You know, you think of these words of Moses giving to the children of Israel and to Joshua, there's a lot there. And I think those encouraging words are to really combat one thing that the human family certainly struggles with, and that's fear. It has always struck me in Revelation chapter 21 and verse 8, where it lists a whole bunch of sins. You know something that kind of makes the list there? It says cowardly. In Revelation chapter 21 and verse 8, it says, but the cowardly, the unbelieving, abominable, Murderers, sexual immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Have you ever thought about that? Being cowardly? That has always struck me when I've read Revelation chapter 21 and verse 8. And you know what? I've dug into the Greek in that word, and let me tell you, there's no surprises. It says in Revelation 21 8, it says the cowardly. If you look it up in the Greek word means the fearful or the timid. As the people of God, we're not really supposed to be timid. As the people of God, we are not to be fearful. As the people of God, we are not to be cowardly. And here we see Moses encouraging the children of Israel and encouraging Joshua. Do not fear. Sometimes things are easier said than done. But let's look at some of the things that are said. It's really packaged a couple times in Deuteronomy chapter 31 as there is multiple encouragements, and some of those multiple encouragements almost happen in one sentence. You can kind of see them in verse 8 rather. And you can also see them in verse 6. But in verse 8 he says, "And the Lord, He is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you, nor forsake you. Do not fear, nor be dismayed." There's a lot there, but one of the ideas that is told to the children of Israel and to Joshua is that God goes before you. That's quite an idea, is it not? You know, we think of God being with us, but what about God going before you? You know, I think about John the Baptist. John the Baptist, the great preparer of Jesus. Back in those times, if a king or somebody was traveling, they would have somebody go out and prepare that path before the king or the dignitary would get to that path. So it would be prepared, it'd be ready. Have you ever thought about the idea that God goes before you? God's doing some work in your life before you can even see it. And we get into the providence of God. And I remember in Philemon where it says, perhaps. And I know that we can't always put our finger down on providence, but there are some times in my life where I look back and I wonder, how long has God been working on this? You know, I actually was in a conversation with somebody a few weeks ago, and they actually asked me this question. They said, "Kyle, how did you end up at Sandyville?" And I just paused for a second and I said, that is a good question. That is a good question. Because if you look at my background and where I came from, and you look at all these players and all these things in the deck, I mean, I'm from Pleasants County, a few counties away, but, you know, and you just start thinking about this, and I look back on my life, and I see this take a turn, and 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 I think in my head, perhaps God certainly wanted me to be here. God went before me, and I think God goes before us in all our lives, and that should give us some comfort. That should have given the children of Israel some comfort and Joshua some comfort that they could be courageous, that they could step faithfully into their lives and say, I'm going to serve the Lord, I'm going to do my best, and I know that God is working out things in my life that I don't even know, I don't even understand. Providentially, He's there. He goes before us. But man, do we struggle with fear sometimes, don't we? We really see it all throughout the Bible. I think of Matthew chapter 10. In Matthew chapter 10, He's going to send them out on the limited commission. In verse 16, He says, Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. He's sending them out. In Matthew chapter 10, He is going to say 3 times, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. It seems like we have a problem with this. Is that as we serve the Lord, sometimes our fears and our anxieties get the better of us. And here, as Moses is giving his kind of final speech, he is trying to tell the children of Israel, don't you understand that God goes before you? God goes before you, working many of these things out. In Matthew chapter 10, on the limited commission, in verse 26, it says, Therefore, do not fear them, for there is nothing covering that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. He says, don't fear them. If you look at verse 28 in chapter 10, he says, And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. In verse 31, he says, Do not fear, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. Here in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus is sending these individuals out on the limited commission, and I don't think it's an accident that He says multiple times, Do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. God goes before us. And what a blessing that is. If God be for us, who can be against us? I think of Psalm 27 and verse 1, "The Lord is the light of my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" But we know it's easier said than done. As many times our fears and our anxieties hold us back from serving the Lord the way that we should. But certainly Jesus was an encourager. I remember in John chapter 14 where Jesus kind of alluded to the idea that he's leaving them, and they get bothered by this, and he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. For in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Jesus, and we see God throughout the Scriptures, always encouraging the servants of the Lord and saying, "Do not be afraid, be courageous, be strong, do those things that are good and right, even when fears and anxieties creep up." In Psalm 23 and verse 4, it says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Do we believe that God is with us? Do we believe that God goes before us? What a blessing that is. God goes before us and works out things providentially in our favor many times. Not certainly impacting the freedom of choice, but God is working providentially in this world. How intimidating for Joshua. You ever think about that? Joshua is about to replace Moses. Moses and Aaron who went to Egypt, and we have the series of plagues across the Red Sea. We have Mount Sinai and the mountain. Now Joshua was there through a lot of this. He got to see it firsthand. But that, in my mind, that is kind of an intimidating situation for Joshua to fulfill, to step into, to follow the shoes of Moses. And I think God knew that. In fact, if you look in Joshua chapter 1, verses 6 through 9, this almost mirrors Deuteronomy chapter 31. Moses is saying, you understand God is going to be with you and he's going to go before you. Don't be afraid. Be strong and courageous. And then in Joshua chapter 1, verses 5 and following, it says to Joshua, it says, "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage. For to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe and to do according to the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or the left, that you may prosper wherever you go." Wait, what's Moses saying before he dies? Joshua, be strong and courageous. And then what do we see in Joshua chapter 1, where Moses is gone? We see that once again, there's an encouragement to be strong and courageous. Brothers and sisters in Christ, if these great individuals of the past needed encouragement, so do we. You know what Satan will try to utilize against us? Our fears and our anxieties to not serve the Lord. I think the devil worked on Moses. I think the devil worked on Joshua. I think the devil is working on all of us. But I do think of Joshua. You know, courage can take many forms and show up in many ways. I think courage often means stepping into leadership when you feel unqualified. I'm not saying that you are unqualified. You feel unqualified. Let me tell you a little secret. The first prayer that I did, there was a bit of fear, a bit of anxiety, a bit of, I'm not the one to lead the prayer. Yeah. You know, the first time I subbed in and preached, I had the same feelings. The first time I started doing 2 Sundays a month for a congregation, I had the same feelings. When I became the youth minister here, I had the same feelings. When I stepped into full-time work, I had the same feelings. You know, when we look on these people of the past, really, do you see their struggle and do you see where they end up? How did Moses respond to his leadership call? We remember the burning bush, and you know what Moses starts to do? Not me. Not me. You know, Joshua might have had a little bit of that too, but we don't get quite as much in the scriptures. But there's other individuals like Gideon. Gideon says, "Are you sure, me, God?" King Saul felt the same way. King Saul started out very humble. He started out very humble. He said, "God, are you sure I'm the guy? Are you sure?" When they were calling out the next king of Israel, he was hiding among the carriages. Courage means stepping into leadership sometimes when you feel unqualified. It takes courage. But God goes before you. I think of David. Remember in 1 Samuel chapter 17, we got the young shepherd boy and he's going up against Goliath. Sometimes courage is trusting in God's ability more than your own. You know, you put that match on pencil paper and you put the odds on that and you start looking at it. Here we've got Goliath, a trained warrior of many years, trained in warfare, a giant, and has all of these things stacked in his favor. And here we have this young shepherd boy who can't even put on Saul's armor. Sometimes courage is trusting in God's ability more than your own. See, David was used on that battlefield that day as a tool. And I think David understood that. Now, David might have had a little ego, maybe a little bit there. We might pick that up from some of the scriptures as we read about some of the things his brother said. But really, when we look at David and we look at his life, he was a man that trusted in God. He says, with God, these things can be accomplished. With God, these things can be done. Sometimes courage is trusting in God's ability more than your own. When we look at the Christians of the past, when we look at the servants of God of the past, do we not think they had some fears and some anxieties that sometimes got the best of them? They certainly had some great moments. And certainly we can reflect on those great moments, but building up to those moments, and as we reflect on them, I think we can understand that there was perhaps some fears and some anxieties as they were going through things. I think of our brothers and sisters in Christ in the early book of Acts. In Acts chapter 4, verses 18 through 20, we start to see some of the flack that they start getting for preaching and teaching about Christ. In Acts chapter 4, verses 18 through 20, it says, "So they called them and commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said, Whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, you judge. For we cannot speak but the things which we have seen and heard." So when they had further threatened them, they let them go, finding no way to punish them because of the people, since all glorified God for what had been done. You know what they're going to do right after this altercation? They're going to pray to God for boldness. That's what they're going to pray for. They are going to pray for boldness. And I think what that shows me is this is something that in their minds, they said, we need some help with this. We need God to be on our side in relation to this. Certainly that was a great feat, standing up the Sanhedrin. And I would note is that many times when they were preaching in the first century, it was not the Romans that were giving them a hard time. You know who's giving them a hard time? The religious elites. It was the Pharisees and the Sadducees that were coming after the preachers of Christ, that were coming after the gospel of Christ. Many times the government would actually side with the New Testament Christians. You know why? Because they obeyed the laws of the land. They were good citizens and they were trying to do what they could that was right. The only thing they had against these guys is they would preach the truth. That was the only thing. You know who's really mad at the preachers, the Christians in the first century? The religious folk. That's who's mad at them. The Pharisees and the Sadducees say, get those guys and stop them from preaching about Jesus. That's who was trying to stop them. The Roman government, actually, you look at Pilate, he was struggling with this. He's almost like, I kind of want to let Jesus go. But the people would not let that happen. They said, crucify him. It was the religious people that were giving the Christians a hard time in the first century. And they had courage. When I look at Deuteronomy chapter 31 there, he says, God goes before you. That's quite an idea. Also, he says God is not going to leave you. You know, it's one thing that God is before you. It's also another thing that God is with you. What an extraordinary thing that is, that God can go before our lives and God can also be with us in the hard moments which we find ourselves. And I think many times people think, I can't wait for my great moment of courage, that I can be like these individuals in the Bible. I hate to tell you, you probably walk across a moment of courage every week in your life, but you don't want to acknowledge it because of the fears and anxieties associated with it. Say, I can't wait for my Goliath moment. Maybe your Goliath moment is calling that person and inviting them to come to services. or better yet, asking them to have a Bible study. Maybe that's your moment of courage. Oh no, Kyle, it's me facing down Goliath. Well, let me tell you this. If we can't offer individual Bible studies, if we can't have conversations with people, I don't know how we would do on the battlefield with Goliath. Sometimes our great moments of courage are not far away. Sometimes they're just a knock away or a call away or a conversation away. God will not leave us in those moments. God is with us. Not only does He go before us, but He's with us in those hard moments. In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 6, it says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's exactly what's said in Matthew chapter 28, when Jesus is sending them out for the Great Commission, and He tells them everything there, and He says, teach them to observe all things that I have commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. God goes before us, but God is with us, and what a blessing that is. God's with us in the hard moments. I think about Esther. That was a hard moment, was it not? There's a law in the books to kill the Jews. Mordecai is going to come to Esther and say, I don't really see a way out of this, and I don't think you're going to escape it, even in the king's household. Esther, what we need is you to go speak to the king without being invited, which could mean her life. And really, when you study the book of Esther, you can see that the king has already had some problems with some women in his life and has removed them from his life because of actions similar to what Esther's about to do, show up unannounced. That was a great moment of courage. You know, I've heard courage defined many different ways. Probably my favorite definition or way to think about it is courage is many times not the absence of fear, but that something's more important than your fear. I'm sure Esther had some reservations about going before the king unannounced and sharing this information. In fact, she's incredibly tactful when you look at the way she brings it up, because she actually goes and says, I'd actually like to invite you to a dinner. And then she works into this very hard situation that's going on with the law in the books to kill all the Jews. She's very tactful, very wise, and she asked for prayer and intervention and for people to fast. She understood the gravity of the situation. But sometimes courage is taking on leadership when you feel unqualified. Sometimes courage means speaking up even when it's safer to stay quiet. You understand that, don't you? Sometimes courage means speaking up even when it's safer to be quiet. That element of our courage might be challenged in the next few years. It takes courage to speak up even when it's safer to be silent. I'm not saying that we don't be tactful when we're not intelligent with things. We can see how various individuals handle different situations, but there is going to be a situation where we're going to have to stand and we cannot be silent. You know, when you look at Esther and what's said there, when Mordecai is kind of going through the convincing there, in verse 14, he says, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That kind of speaks almost of providence. Perhaps God put you right here to speak up right now. The question is, will we? So many great individuals that we can look at. We can consider Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as they're in Babylon. And they say, bow down to the statue. And they said, we will not bow down. Courage obeys regardless of consequence. You know what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were staring down? They were staring down execution by fiery furnace. And they knew it. That's what the king said. The king said that people would be punished, and we start to see that the king tries to negotiate with them, and he says, okay, you get a second chance, but here's the kicker. If you don't do it, you'll be thrown into the fiery furnace. And you know what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say? They say, our God can deliver us, but if not, we're not going to do this. Sometimes courage obeys regardless of consequence. Courage obeys regardless of consequence. It doesn't matter what comes. I'm going to do what's right. And that is really what Moses is trying to get across. I want you to be courageous. I want you to be fearless. I want you to do what is good and right. We see the same thing with Daniel. They outlaw prayer. And you know what the punishment for that is? Being thrown into the lion's den. See, Daniel had courage that his public and his private faith matched up. It takes courage that your private and your public faith match up. Some people know that you attend Sandyville Church of Christ, but when you go out to the workforce, do they know that you attend Sandyville Church of Christ and that you're a good example? Courage stays consistent in private and in public. There are some lessons that are easier to preach, but so hard in application. In fact, that's probably the case in most. Some stuff's easy to preach. It's hard to apply. What's the last moment of courage in your life that you walked on by? You knew what was good and right. You knew that you needed to take a stand. You knew you needed to say this. You knew you should step up. You knew that, and you didn't. Sometimes our fears and anxieties get the best of us, and what Moses is trying to get across is he's trying to say, God goes before you, God is with you, we can have courage. And I think that's really the application, is that when you look at Deuteronomy chapter 31, and you look at that verse 8, and it says, and the Lord, He is the one that goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you, nor forsake you. Do not fear, nor be dismayed. What's the natural conclusion? If God goes before us, if God is with us, that should help us with many of our fears and our anxieties. I like what David said in Psalm 56. In Psalm 56, David is in a hard spot. In Psalm 56, David not only is on the run from his father-in-law, King Saul, who is trying to kill him, he actually is probably at this point being captured by the Philistines, his enemy. In Psalm 56, verses 3 and 4, in the psalm it says this. It says, because of the voice of my enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they bring down trouble upon me, and in wrath they hate me. I'm in the wrong psalm. Psalm 56, verses 3 and 4. Whenever I'm afraid, I will trust in you. David, on run from his father-in-law who's trying to kill him, now he's been captured by the Philistines. He writes a psalm in Psalm 56. And in verse 3, he says, whenever I'm afraid, I will trust in you. I don't know about you, but that seems like a choice. We have to make a conscious choice to trust in the Lord. I don't know if you're familiar with these trust falls. Sometimes they do them at like team building activities. Try to build the team, and they'll have some people behind you, and they'll say, close your eyes and fall back. They'll catch you. I've always struggled with trust falls. Maybe it's because I got two brothers that are ornery, you know. But I kind of struggle with that. You know, God, more times than not, He's asking us to take the trust fall. God's saying, trust in me. Do you trust in God? I'll be honest, there's certain things I struggle with. I try to do everything that I can. Everything in my power. But you know what? We get to a point, we got to let it go with God. I mean, I try to do everything. I try to do this. I try to be so calculated and try to do this. I'm not good on the spot. People think, oh, you're a preacher, you're good on the spot. I am not good on the spot. In fact, I shut down many times. You say, hey, what do you think about this? I sometimes shut down. It's like I like to prepare. In fact, when somebody's doing Bible study, you know what I'm doing the entire time? I am involved in that Bible study, and I'm thinking, if I get called on, what might I say? I'm a preparer. I like to prepare. But you know what? I can prepare as much as I want, and there is so much that's out of my control. We've got to get to a point, like David was, where he said, whenever I'm afraid, I will trust in you. Have you ever thought that fear really shouldn't be part of a Christian's life? I know we struggle with it and we fight with it, but really when you look at the Bible, I think it's a consistent message. If that God goes before you, God is with you, that should minimize our fears and our anxieties. I know we're human, but in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 4 it says, God gave us not a spirit of fear. So when we have fear and when we have anxiety, where does it come from? It's not really coming from God many times. Many times I think things are working on us that perhaps we need to look at. God wants us to step out in faith, and that's a big step. Step out in faith and understand that when we take acts of courage in our lives, that God goes before us, God goes with us, and things will work out. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, it says, we walk by faith and not by sight. This is not that we don't do preparation and we don't try to plan and we don't try to count the cost. Certainly we do those things, but we do what we can, and then we say, God, you're going to take me the rest of the way. That takes courage. You know, it takes courage to keep going when others quit. Have you ever thought about the Civil War? I tell you what, those charges were amazing. You know, Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, you know how many of those guys knew that they were charging to their death? I just stepped back and... You know how many people it takes to turn their back and run before that might affect your courage? It takes courage to keep going when others quit. That might be an extreme example, but I tell you what, when you're running towards a gunfire, everybody else turns and runs the other way. You're the only one standing there. It's easy to say, hey, I'm packing up and going home too. We can't do that in the fight for the Lord. There might be many that pack up their bags and go home and say, I'm not going to be involved with Christ. I'm not going to serve Christ. I'm not going to do those things that are good and right. And we're going to have to stand and say, I will serve the Lord. Doesn't matter how many run away. It takes courage to serve the Lord when others run away. It takes courage to obey in a sacrificial way. Isn't that what Jesus did in the garden? One of the greatest acts of courage. Jesus in the garden, not my will, but yours be done. It takes courage to be a sacrificial servant. You know, when we struggle with fear, there are many strategies that we could utilize. One of the strategies I think about is we should try to sub out our fears. Perhaps I have a little bit of fear about physical death, but I tell you what I fear more, spiritual death. I tell you what, I might fear preaching the gospel, but you know what I fear more? Not preaching the gospel. In fact, I think Paul says that on occasion. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 16, he says, For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yes, woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. You know what Paul's saying? Some things are more important. And one of the great blessings of serving of the Lord is that He makes everything more important than your fears. Now, I'm not saying we're going to win the battle every time, but everything that we do spiritually is more important. Courage is not the absence of fear many times, but it's understanding that there are things more important than your fear. And when we're in the spiritual battle, we're in the spiritual fight, everything spiritually is more important. I'm not saying it's easy. Will we walk in faith? Will we step forward in faith? Will we take these words that are said so long ago and understand that God goes before us? God is with us. He will not forsake us. We need to be strong and of good courage. We're going to need it here at Sandyville. We're going to need it throughout our lives as we serve the Lord. Perhaps you need to become a New Testament Christian. Perhaps you need the prayers of the church. We'd love to help you in any way we can if you come as we stand and as we sing.